All right.
Welcome back. We are here for our March edition. We're here for the March edition of the Trust Your Gut podcast. I am Erin Trent Johnson, and I am here with Dr. A, Antonio Aragona, Doctor of Ayurvedic Medicine, also my Doctor of Ayurvedic Medicine. And we are here for our spring equinox seasonal change edition. And I want to welcome you, Dr. A, and bring us in, as we always do, um, with some wisdom of Ayurveda.
Great. Good morning. Good to be back. Happy March as we're slowly trekking through the season. And the appropriate topic, as is every topic that we discuss every month, is around health and well-being and disease processes and all of these things. And so I will start with this story in Ayurveda from Charaka Samhita that's referencing basically the origin of what's known as disease, or the origin of what is known as uh, Jvara, and I'll get a little bit more elaborate with that soon. But in general, because from this story, there are several major diseases that come out of it. And so when we use the mythology and the storytelling to kind of understand, from the mythical standpoint, the deeper meanings of these things. So sometimes what happens within the context of assessing, Ayurveda or yoga or Jyotish or Tantra, there's a lot of stories, because in the stories, one, retention of the information is easier, and two, it creates capacity to think deeper and see between, the meanings of the story symbols, what is happening, and invokes a certain level of mental capacity. And so this elaborate system that was, originating in India, but also the original cultures of the world that used storytelling to identify with the world, the elements, all of these things, was a way to encompass this knowledge and to pass it forward. And so in the context of Ayurvedic medicine, which is a scientific body of medicine that's been around for several thousands of years, over at least 7,000 years, and understanding that it is a scientific body, but also has its lens capacity like a microscope that can zoom out or zoom in based on what is needed at any given point in time to have a full span of identifying and um, being able to decipher the code reading of like this human existence, right? And so when people talk about we weren't born with a human handbook and how to like be in the world and how to be and survive and live and thrive, Ayurveda is the closest thing to this handbook of how to live, like live fully, completely, pulling in the understanding of like the physics of the day, the circadian rhythm concepts, the mind-gut connection. Like Ayurveda has this all already understood. This is already like, of course. And, looking at how we relate to the world and the seasons and the different parts of the geographies, because each geographic location will have its own climate. And Ayurveda factors all of this in all the time on a continuous basis within each person, knowing the microcosm, or like we say in Ayurveda, loka purusha samya. So like basically as above is below. So what is the human is also the representation of the universe. So this story of understanding like the manifestation of different diseases um, comes out of Charaka Samhita, which is uh Chikitsastan, which is like the chapter on Dvara. Dvara is the primary chapter of like what in Western medicine would be called like fever, but in Ayurveda, this is the fever paradigm. And so the story, because it's a very long story, I won't try to reiterate it in Sanskrit. I'll save that with the short slokas. Um, this is how it goes. So the origin of Dvara is because of the tendency, and this is a side note, some of the terms are really clear and abrupt and sort of like absolute, but like it can be perceived as judgment. But if we can get past this idea that there's a judgment, from the negative standpoints, and using a judgment from the positive standpoint, and understanding like how am I judging the information coming in, can I be open to it before closing my mind to it? This is an important key, because this is
Mm.
also like representing a certain body from a different language that's translated. So what's translated sometimes get lost. So just kind of put that into context. So the origin of Dvada is because of the tendency for greed or attachment, parigraha. It has been described earlier in other chapters that the origin of Dvada resulted from the ferocious wrath of Rudra, or Lord Shiva. So here's this symbol of Shiva. So during the Treta Yuga, the second age, because we're considered to be like in Kali Yuga right now, which is like the age of confusion, destruction, and all these things, which lasts thousands and thousands of years. Lord Shiva took a vow of not manifesting anger or wrath for 1,000 celestial years, which in human time is like 20,000 years. During this time, the Asuras, the demons, indulged in creating obstruction, playing mischiefs, and destroying the sacrament and the meditation of the rishis, the sages, the divine beings that were in this planet at the beginning when the Himalayas were like giving us the Vedic knowledge. Daksha Prajapati was capable of combating these demons, but he ignored his duties of opposing those demons and further organized a yajna, or a ritual sacrifice, in which he did not offer any share to Lord Shiva, in spite of being told to do so by the other lords. He even did not chant the hymns described in the Vedas of Lord Shiva, which provides fulfillment to the desired objective of yajna, and even did not offer ahuti, or pouring of ghee in the sacrificial fire, to Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva perceived whole of the situation regarding Daksha Prajapati's non-observance of rules and became angry. He then brought forward his Raudra, wrathful, bhava, nature, and opened his third eye, destroying all those demons by burning them, and further gave rise to a child-like form named Virabhadra. In his wrath, and Virabhadra is also like lightning. So this
Mm.
lightning consciousness, who was stuffed with his anger and was capable of destroying the yajna of Daksha. That child demolished the yajna of Daksha Prajapati, as a result of which the gods got afflicted with burning sensation and pain, and started running in different directions and became afflicted. Then the gods, along with the seven rishis, offered those substantial hymns to Lord Shiva till he became pleased and switched over to his Shiva, the compassionate or benevolent and auspicious form. When it was known that Lord Shiva's returned to his auspicious disposition, then Virabhadra, who was produced from the wrathful fire of Lord Shiva, who had 3 heads and 9 eyes, used ash as his weapon, had the flame of his fire as his garland, was wrathful, had frightful and small thighs and stomach, approached Lord Shiva with folded hands and inquired about his future work. Lord Shiva replied to him that you will become Dvada in this world and afflict people in the beginning of life, at birth, at the time of death, and will also afflict those who will resort to erratic regimen. So there's a lot of symbolism. I can spend hours breaking this down.
Yes.
And so for simplicity and time purposes, we can say there's this understanding and consciousness that in order for us to be aligned and more harmonious, this is behooving it behooves us to do
Hmm.
so, because this will produce more optimal outcomes as we are connected to the universal consciousness, to earth consciousness, to seasonal consciousness, to community consciousness. When we forget these things, then this disconnection, when we use the word sin, and Catholicism, Christianity, other traditions, it has a negative connotation. You sin, you did something wrong. We look at the Latin root, sin means to be without. So if I'm without consciousness, without thought, right? Pranya parada, without proper intelligence, or lacking, or the crimes of wisdom. Like I'm without
Yes.
the wisdom, so I'm lacking the wisdom. I'm ignorant of this. And so when I don't pay homage to like the life, the gratitude, the seasons, the connectedness, understanding how my role is as part of nature versus overriding nature, then I'm going to experience these punishments, right? We say punishments and we think negatively, and everyone jumps in New Age spirituality. Karma's a bad thing. You're being condemned to hell. No, that has the Victorian slash Christian Catholic sort of like jurisdiction, and it's not
That's
correct.
right. Yes,
It
very
does
Protestant
provoke,
punishment.
yeah,
Hmm.
it is provocative to think what is cause and effect, because karana karya, which is a concept we've talked about of cause and effect, choices that we make will affect us, of course. And we try to be in our rightful place to make choices, you know. But as I've mentioned before, manasika doshas, which are like the doshas of the mind, the configurations of the mind that are either erratic, focused on passion and lust and desire, or the inert, dark, tamasic, kind of like absence of consciousness, clarity, Like this is where most people are
Mhm.
vacillating between, and sattva is the place in between, which creates this homeostasis where like all three are in balance. And so when we get into sattvic practices, we start to see clearly the universe, the world, our relationship to the world. We make better choices from this sattvic standpoint. And then we're more aligned with this consciousness that's embedded in all things around the entire universe, right? And so
Mhm.
in this story, I'm understanding like, Dvada was created. And from what was not is now, as a reminder from Lord Shiva, that when we are not living in alignment with nature, when we're not living in alignment with the understanding of like what is our individualized health, which is swasta for ourselves, then we're going to be more prone to this because it's already understood that all things that have heartbeat, that have life force, will be born into Dvada. And Dvada, is not just fever. Dvada is, considered that which torments, that which causes dismay, that which causes pain, that which causes suffering, that which causes disease, that which causes, fevers. Like Dvada is fever. Dvada, from Shushrut's Uttarasthana quote, Svedo avarodas santapaha sarvadagam grahanam tata. Vikara Yuga Padyasmin Parika Sarikirtaha. Jvadasa Parikirtaha. So it's like, yeah, the general definition of fever is like, um, body temperature issues, basically production of heat, aches and pains, absence of sweating. These are all the things that as they're confluent will be the idea that this is fever happening. Most people in Western training think, training as Western at some person that just grabs a thermometer and says, well, if you have a fever, let me take a temperature. If it's above 99.9 or 100, then you have a little bit of a fever. Ayurveda says, yes, there's going to be that, but where it's going to manifest in each person will slightly differ. Some people might get chills, aches, and pains. Those chills are part of fever. It doesn't have to get 104.2 to say that there's a fever. If there's aches and pains, absence of sweating, or excessive sweating, and there's a high heat, or there's absence of sweating, which means there's obstruction in the channels and obstruction in the digestive system, what are we looking at? Like what is this? It's a broader understanding. So we look through observation of, tactile sensation of checking pulse, temperature, but also asking questions like, are you sweating? Are you not sweating? You have appetite? You don't have no appetite? Like where are we at within the context of this? And so Dvada was this sort of like imbued and injected into the humanity of like as a reminder that when we start living out of alignment, Dvada is very close and we die from Dvada, right?
Mhm.
So all things.
Mhm.
And so amongst the classic physicians, Bhagbat and Charaka and Sushrut, they said they're basically there's an agreement like 8 to 9 to 12, we'll say within like 8 Maharogas or 8 major diseases
Mhm.
that from the eight, everything else kind of comes out of, and then some that don't have a name. Of the number one of the eight is Drata. And in clinical training, we understand that if we can understand the ups and downs, backwards, forwards, sideways of Drata, how it manifests, we can understand all diseases, past, present, and future. Like this is
Yes.
the wisdom of this. And so, then in Ayurveda we say we can expound on this and say there are 8 types of Drata, but then we know there's more because the permutations, right? So if there are 8 types of Dvara, we have Vata-based Dvara, so Vataja Dvara, Pittaja Dvara, Kaphaja Dvara, Vata Kaphaja Dvara, Pitta Kapha Dvara, Vata Pitta Dvara, Vata Kapha Dvara, and then we have Agantuja Dvara, which is like external causes, right? Then it's like, well, if you
Mhm.
have the 7 major combinations of the doshas, and then you have the eight, the eighth one, which is like external causes, exposed to poison, bitten by something, like something like this. Accidents, certain kind of accidents can trigger autoimmune responses, like, traumas to the body can trigger, so like external causes. The
Mhm.
list goes very fast in so many ways, and we have to assess at each person, like which part of Dvada are we addressing to know that most people will have Dvada at some point in their lifetime for sure, because this is part of being in humanity. And then in the understanding of Dvada applied to all diseases, it's like when a person is infected with something, well, there is sort of some um, manifestation in some permutation of this fever paradigm, and it's going to represent in each person slightly differently based on pre-existing conditions, we'll say, right? So in
Yes.
COVID, for an example of like a drought up paradigm. Um, we got the initial list of like six primary lakshanas or symptoms that were like, if you have, less, your oxygen is reduced and you're having breathing difficulties and you're having constipation or diarrhea, if you're having stomach issues and extreme aches and pains, you know, then you're in coronavirus territory.
Yeah.
After a month, that list went from like six to like 15 to 20 to the 30. And then it's like all these other things. And it's like, what's happening here? Then how did it manifest in certain cultures more than others? It's like, well, you look at the quality of health of that culture as a whole to know like when fire, Dvara, Virabhadra, lightning comes through, it's going to go faster,
Yes.
you know?
I want to can we slow down right there?
Yes.
Or, there's something that was emerging for me immediately when you talked about the eighth external, like the eighth cause, was the external forces and exposure to poisons. And I thought about all the different kinds of poisons, like what could poison mean? What are the toxins? And and then thinking about obviously also traumas to the body that are traumas that trauma being not what happens, but how the body responds to what happens. And as we think about, for instance, the coronavirus or the long COVID, which is a term that has been coined in Western medicine, and really it wasn't named by doctors; it was named by people. It was named by
Hmm.
patients.
Hmm.
Who were reporting symptoms, as you mentioned, these symptoms that were growing in number over time, long after the original infection,
Hmm.
and then bodies that um, have experienced exacerbated symptoms. I am one of those bodies. I'm in one of those bodies. I'm in a Black body. I'm in a wombed body. I'm in a body
Hmm.
that has a uterus that that has right now is still trying to grasp my words. So I've had gaps in memory. I've had deep impact on my cognition. You know this, so
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
sharing this with folks who are watching, listening. And my last COVID infection was in 2023 that I know of, right? I haven't
Hmm.
tested positive for COVID in 2 years, almost 2 years,
Hmm.
but I can experience flares of what could be called a combination of symptoms. And yes, we know that there are groups, and we can say cultures. We can also say groups that are experiencing systemic impacts of external toxins that are related to how we relate to these systems. So whether that is how we experience healthcare system, how we experience um, the housing system, how we experience environmental toxins, how we experience social cultural toxins, right? Relational toxins, the toxins of interacting with these institutions that may not see our bodies as human or whole, um, that may not see that we're also, as someone who has experienced medical gaslight, right? When I'm naming all of these symptoms that are in different parts of my body to Western medical doctors, they will tell me, oh, well, your blood work does not show that there's anything wrong, or your blood work doesn't reflect your symptoms. So there's no biomarker for us to make meaning or understand your symptoms. And if we can't understand it, then there's no conversation to be had here. There's nothing we can do for you, or what you're experiencing is not real, right? Which is what gets
Hmm.
communicated. That's a toxin. That's a poison that I have experienced in this body over and over and over again for 43 years. And also my parents and ancestors. So there's a generational and a transgenerational relationship, an intergenerational relationship with these institutions that is toxic, that has taught me I will not be believed, don't trust my body, right? And so I have to navigate that. So as I'm hearing you name, right, like, yes, there are cultures and groups, and there's also, and we've talked about, right, like there are also different ways that our lineage, our bodies genetically, right? Not that race is not genetic, but there are experiences that we have culturally that get passed down, that get expressed through the genes epigenetically. So I just wanted to like jump in there with that because I know like we're talking about what is misunderstood. How does Ayurveda see this? So that's I wanted to come in there.
Yeah, and since you're emphasizing like the interactions with like certain, bodies of science and things like that that, you know, have, you know, deficits. I think every system, it's safe to say like every system has a mastery, every system has a deficit. Which one has the most of the benefits than the deficits? This is the thing to be evaluated. When we think about, like, okay, there are certain elements of toxicity, from like these types of interactions because there's a gaslighting that's perceived or something like that. First, just to kind of say, you know, everyone that's a healthcare provider, we're all doing the best that we can with what we know. So
Yes.
everyone's doing the best. Some might have some malicious intentions, some might not. That's a different thing. But overall, if we're in this field, it's because we have this deep dharma and duty to
Yes.
like being of support to people to the best of our capacity with what we know. Ayurveda gives us a much broader lens to know more. So that's why it's easier. It's not that we don't have the I don't know moments. Then we have to really sit with the meat materials and, confer with colleagues. And, Western medicine does that too. So this, there's that similarity. Western medicine relies upon the labs. And so if they come to a place where like labs look fine, but you have symptoms, I read it. That makes sense because there's this uh, pathological process called samprapti, which is like the six-step process of disease. From the clinical standpoint of Ayurveda, we say Western medicine using the labs to determine something is there. So usually it's stage three, between stage three and stage four already. So
Mhm.
that if it shows up in the lab work, then it's already past stage three, definitely in stage four. And so Western medicine catches it at that point. Ayurveda catches it at stage one, right? So we know how to
Mm.
look for stage one. And so Western medicine is limited to some capacity because, some of them are, some physicians in Western medicine are like, I know you're having symptoms, but all the tests that we did here, and CAT scan and CT and ultrasounds and X-rays, everything looks fine, but you're having symptoms. I don't know, you know, and then that's what becomes jarring and frustrating because you want to know because as a clinician we study
Yes.
endlessly. Being a doctor is, once you become a doctor, you're studying. You should be studying the rest of your life. Like you should never
Mhm.
feel like you are comfortable in your knowing it all because there is no such thing
Yeah.
because it is limitless. And so when you come to a place where like, oh, well, the tools that I have that I've used suggest that there is nothing when there is something. Now I don't know what to do. Now I have to figure out from colleagues or just kind of brush it off because I'm so overwhelmed in the system and so exhausted and have to just move to the next person and hopefully figure it out or refer this case that is the unknown to someone else that might know a little bit more, which I've gotten a lot of those cases over the 20 years of doing this for sure.
Mhm.
And 9.5 times out of 10, I come to a place of knowing what it is and have helped, which is great. And because it's helping Western medicine along, Western medicine helps me along where even as a clinician, I might say, let's get some labs, for certain things, because it's one more angle. It's not discounted. I was having a conversation with a friend who's going through a process of cancer, and, she points out like the standard of care for cancer is radiation and chemotherapy. I'm like, yes. And she's like, well, those are horrible. And I said, in Ayurveda, we know that you know, a poison can also be a medicine when it's used
Mhm.
properly. So, a lot of people like to vilify like chemotherapy and radiation, and it's an intense, it is a poison. It kills everything. It's supposed to kill everything. It's doing its job. Unfortunately, it's killing the things that are not supposed to be killed. And we try not to kill the good things. We try to keep the bad things from producing while keeping the good things strong, right? So in Ayurveda, when a person is going through that process of chemo and radiation, we put a lot of things in place to fortify the strength of the body to endure if that's the medicine that is needed or chosen by the patient. And Ayurveda can most likely clean up a lot of that for sure. And, of the Maharogas that I said, there's eight main considered diseases that are like, the focus, starting with Dvara as number one. We have Arshas, which is like hemorrhoids or things happening in the rectum. Grahani, which is like IBS category, we'll say. Radyakshma, which is like tuberculosis. So interesting to think about tuberculosis still today and how it's applicable. Prameha, which is like diabetes, but it's more elaborate because in Ayurveda there's eight types of diabetes and then some. Vata Vyadhi, which is like the category of like all the Vata predominant diseases, and there's said to be 80 diseases of Vata and then some. And then Agada Tantra, which is like the medicines that are used to treat, because Gada is like injury, to what extent is an injury? Is it from a poison? Well, then likely in this context, agada means to be without the poison. It's the medicines to fortify and sort of cure, take care of the body's health and well-being. And so when we think about agada tantra in the context of what we were just saying, it's like we're thinking agantuja dvara is more like, yes, you can get stressors from the system that's pre-existing for decades and centuries. That stress goes to the Hridaya. And like last month's talk on Hridaya and what are the things that compromise Hridaya, which is ayasa, which is stress. And stress weakens immunity. Leading cause of all disease is stress. We can say the leading cause of all diseases and people dying is Drada, right?
Mhm.
Because the heart and the centrality of this geography houses a lot of important pieces that help sustain health and well-being. So that mental stress will go to the heart over and over and over again, which is like a wear and tear. So, the repeated exposure to systematic failures causes that deficit in the tissues to that capacity, including like ojas, which is like a constituent of immunity. And then immunity drops, and then you're more susceptible to things, and the doorway is open, and you're going to be compromised. And then digestion gets thrown off 100% because digestion follows where the mind goes. And so if you're eating while you're angry, eating on the go, eating while standing, eating while driving, eating while distracted, you're compromising your system right from there. There's no excuse.
Mm.
The quickest way to die, one of my colleagues, John Douillard, said, is eat while standing,
Mm.
right? Eat while you're on the go. This is no, horses eat on the go, right? They stand all the time. This is not ideal.
Mhm.
So like we're looking at what are the underlying currents that cause these compromises. And then, of course, if you're in foraging through the woods and you eat the wrong thing, you get poisoned. If you get a tick bite or if you get bitten by a dog that has rabies, and you know environmental poisons where you're being exposed to like EMFs, and you're being exposed to like the contamination of water and soil, and of course, and then all the plastics, and then you're thinking, yeah, there's poison slowly creeping in. And then when you're having medications, Western medicine technically falls onto Garavisha, which is like the combination of chemicals that create this long lasting effect in the body. It takes a long time to die, but you eventually die. It's like these things accumulate. So we're looking at the physiological aspect of poisons and how they accumulate. So Angada Tantra is one of the eight Maharogas, but starting with Dvara because the system is compromised. And so we're looking at this and we understand like if I'm under so much undue stress, then of course I'm already reducing my immunity, right? And then
Mhm.
if I'm in this rajasic tamasic place of, disjointedness and lack of clarity and ambiguity and darkness and fragmented and kind of lusting and following my desires, I'm attached to things externally and I can't see clearly. So how can I make a clearer choice? Right. So then this is when,
Mhm.
you come to an Ayurvedic clinician. While we see that you're going through this vacillation, we're kind of helping steer the ship, right?
Yes.
We're like the head pirate or captain of the ship. And
Yes.
we're hijacking to redirect you with the choices, but we can't force you to make choices. Um, We can support you in the choices you feel to make by giving you the right information. But then we also know karma plays a role, that if you make the choice where you're prolonging your process of recovery and delaying going here, going there, and focusing on, positivity and the lighthearted spiritual stuff and all that stuff, thinking that that will be the grace and miracle that happens, that's a tricky place because then you're sort of stuck and it's a lot, you're not in reality.
That.
Like, the body brings you back to reality every day.
Mhm.
You poop. Ideally, you're at a present moment with pooping. You're aware of like, oh, I'm straining. This is uncomfortable. Or wow, it's flooding out of me. Or I can't pee because there's a swelling. Or, like I'm having some allergies. Or I'm having, like the body's going to produce symptoms to get your attention and brings you to reality. Some people get used to it because
Mhm.
they have so many things that they just adapt. But I read as like, no, we shouldn't be adapting to illness present. Just make the changes that can mostly reverse a lot of these things. And that's the new state of health to be used to. It's better to be like, my body is accessible to me than inaccessible
Mhm.
to me. Right? Don't get accustomed to like, well, I'm gonna have, there's some things you might have
I
for
have heartburn. I just have heartburn. I'm just
I
used to
just
having
take the
heartburn.
Tums and keep going. But then I'm wondering
Yes,
why, like,
that.
now I need throat surgery, or now that I'm having like bleeding
Yes.
out my rectum and ulcerative colitis, and my sleep is off, and I have this big distended belly, and they're telling me I'm getting gallstones. Of course, this is no
Yes.
surprise, because we follow this trajectory in Ayurveda. We know the cause and effect of these things.
I think there's something here, coming back to, right, the consciousness, lightning consciousness, right, that shock, and calling you into awareness and connection with the body in reality, and from an astrological perspective, I'm really sitting with both, like, the Western astrology and thinking about tropical astrology and thinking about Saturn and what Saturn represents, as reality,
Mhm.
as coming into the form of the body, and being aware of the reality within this
Mhm.
body. And then I'm curious because I'm thinking about the role that Saturn plays in Vedic astrology, and or in Jyotish, and what you've shared
Mhm.
here, about what Saturn represents, in being in relationship to the reality, of our
Mhm.
bodies.
Yeah, so the thing with that, what's interesting is because, um, you know, when we talk about karma in Ayurveda, like, the karma is also part of the astrology, because the astrological imprint that's present at the time of birth, which is why we look at the time and the day and all those things, and location, geography, um, is the imprint as a vibrational component that's measurable from the Eastern standpoint. Not even just Ayurvedic standpoint, but Chinese medicine has astrology, Tibet medicine has astrology, like from this concept. And but also knowing that at that moment of consciousness, when the ovum and the egg join, and when the ovum and the sperm join, the consciousness that's already coming in through this collective consciousness of time, the soul that's jumping, if we're believing in that level of reincarnation, etc., or not, just I understand this polarity of consciousness, soul, whatever, is bringing in already some baggage. And it's somehow not coincidental. It's in that moment in time that this is the configuration in this lifetime. So in the astrological imprint of the blueprint of the reading of the chart, you know, astrologers can read more or less like what choices you'll make, knowing if they know your chart well enough, they can tell what your choices you're going to make based on the configurations of Rajas and Tamas and all the planets and the doshas. Because from the Vedic standpoint, we can see the doshas and Rajas and Tamas, which no other system does, to see like, because it's not just, oh, Jupiter is present, and it's not just the moon is present. It's like, Kapha, Kapha. Oh, Saturn, Kapha. Saturn's more, Vata. And then we have the
Mhm.
sun, which is more Pitta, and it's not Mount Moose is more Pitta. And then it's like, which is more Rajasic, which is more Tamant. Like, so we can tell from the chart, like, how most people are going to make these choices. So in the present lifetime, when you have this sort of like blueprint design, and again, with all astrology across the world, based on Shiva's curse, different curse. He makes a lot of curses.
She was out there just
He's cursing people out all the time. He's trying to keep people on the path, and the parameter is when you're off the path, you'll get the hard smack. And so that is 80% of all astrology will only be completely true and accurate because the other 20% will always allow for choice
free will and
and
choice.
free will.
Mhm.
And so you might have a certain disease that's going to come up and shows it will always show in your chart. It will always show.
Mhm.
Disease will always show in your chart. You can really hone in on what disease, how long it's going to last, if you're going to survive, what's going to be needed, da, 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 da. Um, and the tendencies of what choices you might make. Should I go for chemo? Should I go for radiation? Should I do like insulin? Should I do not insulin? Should I do antibiotics for Lyme? Should I not do antibiotics for Lyme's? This is already understood in that picture, and whatever choices you make will kind of indicate the outcome. And if the outcome is you did everything you could do, you went to a pure vegetarian diet and you did all these cleanses and you did all these things, you still died of cancer. You still died, even though you meditated. Well, then you died in a more peaceful soul. That means the next
Mhm.
lifetime, more than likely, you probably won't have the thing. It might be something else, right? And so we look at this in the context of like, what choices are we making? What choices can we make? What choices do we not? And always account for what choices are we not making because we don't know the whole picture, right? When you go
Yes.
see a doctor, when you go see an expert, when you go see an authority in the healthcare field, our vision goes wider. One, because we see countless patients every year. So the permutations are much grander. And
Mhm.
two, it's just even from that experience, because of the inherent like the studious process of this, you're meant to have like more of a multifaceted approach and hold and still kind of think in a logical way, like what is the best trajectory here? And how do we go forward for the best possible outcome? Like we're all still shooting for the best possible outcome here, right?
That.
And that's the thing. And I don't know that many, I don't really know any Ayurvedic physicians colleagues that are like, I'm so spent from being an Ayurvedic physician that I can't provide service to people and I need to retire, or like I'm exhausted and there's this turnover. Maybe the more modernized Ayurveda that is like, yeah, like 15 minutes, just a quick in and out, because I mean, that's the Western model. It's infiltrating
Mhm.
everywhere, right?
Yes.
The ones that don't, I think are able to maintain. And that's why, like, I don't know any Ayurvedic physicians that retired. They might not be practicing in America as much, but they're still in India practicing. They might be like, I'm leaving to go back to India. They're still
Mhm.
practicing. They're not just sitting in a chair drinking a mimosa going, I was done as an Ayurvedic. No, this Western medicine, you get spent because it's a higher turnover and there's more stress and more, we don't have an Ayurveda, the pharmacy company, like looming over us, dictating what we're supposed to do with our healthcare. No, we
Mhm.
use the pharmacy for our benefit. It will never be pharmacy overriding us. And it's not a marketing capitalistic process in Ayurveda. Not that it's impossible because you have boutique Ayurvedic centers in the US and in India that sell the special boutique name products and use this for your heart health and all these like
Mhm.
things, and it's very cute. And but there still should be a line between people like using their inherent wisdom and thinking, what can I try, versus like I am self-diagnosing and treating. Leave that for the experts.
So I want to come to this point that I love that you said use your wisdom to discern. This is one of the key reasons why we have this podcast and these conversations is to support people with discernment, to support people in accessing wisdom and their authority, right, in their relationship with health, the self authority. And I want to be clear that just coming back to your point, I absolutely agree. The conversations that we have about Western medicine and modern medicine and the doctors that practice is not a condemnation of the doctors. They are within a system. And so I think we critique the system. We critique the way the system functions or malfunctions, doesn't function, but that is in fact still a function.
Mhm.
And I think it's helpful. I really appreciate what you're naming here in that we are not saying that Ayurveda is infallible. We are not saying that Ayurvedic doctors are infallible. We are speaking to a holistic understanding of health and how interdependence is still a core component, what I continue to hear from Ayurvedic wisdom, and that incorporates Western medicine. Ayurveda does not cleave off. What I'm hearing is Ayurveda says we incorporate because this now is a part of the world of the patient. Um, and I think these are really important messages as we look to seek our self authority and discern um, what makes sense. What are the choices? How can we be in choice with our health? This is conscious living, and we're going into a new season. So I'd love to kind of close us out with um a connection to the new season.
Mhm.
The spring equinox is upon us. I am so ready. I wore flowers today. I'm ready. I'm so finished with winter.
Yeah,
I am so finished. I am so finished. And this Aries season is upon us. Um,
yeah,
I look to how Ayurveda. I'm not
yeah.
going to call out your sun sign, but how Ayurveda. I have so many like just incredible beloved Aries humans in my life
Yeah.
who light a fire under me, including you.
Well, that's from
to,
the Vedic perspective, that's more because of my Mars and not as much as the Aries. Because in Vedic
yes,
astrology,
Mars,
in Vedic astrology,
Aries
I'm
being at home with
Pisces. I'm
Mars.
a Pisces
You're a okay.
in Vedic. Yeah. Because in Vedic
I'm
astrology,
on Mars. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm an Aries, I should say. I'm an
yeah,
Aries
because in Vedic
in
astrology,
Vedic astrology.
basically the rule is, and depending on what time you're born, but mostly the rule is whatever your sign is in the west is a sun sign, you move back 28 degrees because there's more understanding of the degrees than Western.
Yes.
So you move back a sign basically, but that's a whole
Mm-hmm.
different story. And so coming into the season, coming into this natural component of like what's happening this time of year and thinking about intelligence again, to really use proper discernment, we need to put the things in place to create the proper discernment so we can make those better choices. We can't make choices from confusion or erratic states or sympathetic responses. Like you don't make the best choices when you're activated, you make the best choices when you're inactivated. And so when people are trying to make the best decisions, they probably should slow down first to make clarity happen so that they
That.
know the inner guidance, because it's not easy. Because of course, from the holistic component, everyone wants to feel empowered and make the choice in their direction. But how can you trust yourself in making the choice, thinking you're using the proper discernment when your mind, when you're, like in the 90s and the 80s, the old radio station, you were getting from one station to the next, but in that in between, it's a little static. Most people are in that static place, but most people think they're at what's the Philly station, 99.7 or something, or
Mhm.
whatever the station is in Philly.
I haven't
Whatever.
listened to the radio in so long, but
Yeah,
you're
it's
talking
been
about
a so bit.
98.9.
Yeah, 98.9. You
Power
think most
99.
people think they're a 98.9, but they're a 98.1. And that
Mhm.
one little bit of a difference would make fragmentation. So how can you choose? How
That.
can you know that you're making a proper decision from that place unless you really get to 98.9? And
Mhm.
then knowing if I am in that place of 98.9, well, what's happening this time of year as things are transitioning? Well, if you have pets, they're going to start shedding their skin, right?
Mhm.
Animals start to shed, you know, and it's like we're letting go of the last few months of craziness with the weather and the cold and the never ending cold and looming and grayness and clouds and knowing like, I'm supposed to be lightening up. So that means I should be, one, adjusting to the temperature changing as it's going to 60 to 70. So lighten up, you don't need as many layers. The food should be lightening up because technically, as we're in the spring season, we should be working on cleansing the body. If we use the word detoxing, you're cleansing the body, lightening up the things so that you can create space because it's an absolute need today, as per Ayurveda, that everyone to some capacity should be doing seasonal cleansing more now than ever in history because of the acceleration of how things are just so infiltrated with contamination and stressors. These kinds of cleanses, like panchakarma, very specifically, can address mental health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health very radically, very aggressively. If you're not able to do panchakarma, then it's like always the next step in the spectrum of like, what can I do to honor the seasonal transition? Because and thinking you're just gonna still wear long clothes until like May, June, or if you're going to be that person that's still wearing those shorts and flip-flops throughout the year, you're not honoring the season. You are going to be susceptible to disease. Maybe not now, later. And the Samhitas, the classical texts of medicine of Ayurveda, say this. You have to dress per
Mhm.
the season. You have to eat per the season. You have to eat per the constitution. You have to eat to your level of appropriate fullness. A lot of people don't know that. They don't know how to gauge that. They just keep eating until they feel nauseous. You know,
Mhm.
this is not lightening up the body. And as we're transitioning through the season and Agni, digestive fire, gets slowly weakened as we get closer to the summer months, then that means the body should be less encumbered by the food coming in. Otherwise, you're bulking and putting heavy things on the system, and you're like, why am I having respiratory issues? Why am I having skin issues? Why is my sleep worse? Why is my weight not going down? Ayurveda's like, of course.
Right. Yes, of course.
And it's like, and to the degree that, Ayurveda doesn't enable people, it makes you accountable for yourself. That's why, like, Ayurveda is for everyone. It's a universal system that takes care of everyone in the world, in the universe. It's universal. But not everyone is for it because not everyone wants to, because of lust and greed and desire and attachment to all these things that I just want to eat what I feel like. Yeah, well, how's that going for you when you have blood pressure issues, thyroid issues, sleep issues, constipation issues, diarrhea issues? How's that feel when you're always getting sick? Well, to what degree is the weight of that worth you saying, you know what, I need to change? People usually wait till they get an official diagnosis of Western medicine saying you're at stage 5, 6, and the samprapti that you have a disease diagnosis that maybe I should change. Or I'll just keep taking Western medicine and not do very much to change what I'm doing. But statistically, we know that with each decade, there's a couple more medications that get added onto your list once you start Western medicine. So it's like you can make the choices, and this chart will tell you you have the potential to not be in that trajectory, or this is your trajectory because this is what you're meant to endure. You're meant to die of this or that or drada, right? And the earth with the seasons, as accelerated as the intensity of the seasons are, with the and more intense storms, the more intense snow, the more intense heat. In the 80s, when I look back, it's like I used to say when we were thinking about global warming, I was like, yeah, the Earth body, Mama Earth, has a fever. And so fevers are designed to destroy viruses, bacteria, and any kind of pathogenic infection. Earth is taking care of itself. When we're
That's
not in
right.
alignment with it, we want to keep blowing up these bombs and atom bombs and keep using all these chemicals and petroleum substances. Earth is like, that's fine, my child. You can put your hand in the fire, even though I told you not to do that, and you don't want to listen because you think there's no global warming issue. That's okay. But when you die and I'm still here, who's the mama?
Well, I think that really sums up, I think hmm. I have a mentor, Leticia Nature, who's the mama? That part. I have a friend who a mentor, and she often will speak about an adequate response to an inadequate experience. And so absolutely, the Mama Earth is saying, absolutely not. Um, absolutely not. And you can keep doing what you're doing.
I'm gonna wash
Um,
you out here. I'm gonna burn you up there. I'm gonna slam you with an earthquake. So whichever of the elements you're invoking the most of, that's what you get the most of.
and so as we enter this spring equinox, with Aries, who does bring that kind of young, like, I want to do what I want energy. I have a focus, and this is my focus. Um, and sometimes led by the fire of impulse. Um, but also brings courage
Yeah,
and the ability to try something new.
yeah.
And so we are practicing new relationships with change.
Hmm.
So I want to thank you, Dr. A. You can find Antonio Aragona, Doctor of Ayurvedic Medicine, at stillpointayurveda.com, and we'll have the link um, to accompany this podcast episode. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah, we're both headed into cleanse and I'm preparing myself for my seasonal
Hmm.
cleanse, it's necessary.
Yep.
More than ever, I can absolutely speak to that. So I want to wish you a wonderful Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. Happy
Happy
Mercury Day.
Wednesday.
Yes. And we'll see you next month.
See you next month. Thank you so much.